Hi, in this video we'll talk about Angular services, what they are, how to use them, how to create services using Angular CLI. After that we'll have a couple examples, and in one of them we'll create a service that will call data from the remote server using HTTP GET call. And the data will be received in a JSON format, so we're gonna talk about what is JSON format data. First question is, what are services? This definition comes from the official Angular documentation, and basically what it says, a service is typically a class with a narrow, well-defined purpose. There are two main purposes the Angular services are used for. The first one is to share information or logic between different components, and the second one is for data services. Here's a diagram of an Angular application communicating with a server. So we have our Angular application that is sending HTTP requests to the backend, and usually backend it's an application sitting on a server and communicating with the database. To create a service, we'll be using an Angular CLI, and the command to create a service is ng-generate service name, or you can use a shorthand. In the next step, you will make the service available to the whole application, and we'll talk about different ways to do it. And of course, to use it in a particular component, you will have to import the service and then inject the instance of that service inside your constructor. Let's go to the VS Code and look at the example. We'll be working on our sample application that we created in the previous videos. And our application has 3 pages. Let's run our application and see how it looks. I'm gonna type ng-serve and press enter. Let's look at it. We have 3 pages: home page, contacts page, and about page. I'm gonna stop my application, Control C. Let me expand it. The first service we're gonna create is a service where we're going to be sharing information between all components. To create a service, I'm going to type, and as you remember, if I don't want a test file to be included, I can type, press enter. And as you can see, here I have a service created for me. Let me expand it. The file that was created has an extension TS, and it means it's a TypeScript file. As you can see, our service is a class, and this class has this decorator, injectable. On line 4, you can also see this property provided in root, and this is what makes it available for the whole application. There's a different way to do that. You can just remove this object. Let me save it, Control S. And I can go to the app module TS. And this is the file where we'll list all components and services. If I scroll down, there will be an array of providers here on line 25. Here, I can list all my services. Let's put the name of my service. And VS Code also created an import statement for me right here on line 1. Registering your service in this file will give you the same results as it was before, but it's actually a preferred way if you do it inside your service. Let's leave it here for now, since it's just an example. Let me save it, Control S. And now let's talk how we're gonna share information between components. Let's say I want to bring something from the database to my home component, and after that I wanna share that value between all other components. Let me go to the home component, HTML file, and here I'm gonna place a tag to display a straight line. After that, I'm gonna create a paragraph, and inside that paragraph is gonna say hello and some name. And I'm going to use a string interpolation, where inside I'm gonna put the name of a variable we're gonna create in a second. Let me save it, Control S, and I'm gonna go to the TS file of our component. And here I'm going to create a variable, and the variable is going to be a string, and I'm going to initialize it with an empty string. Control S. After we created this empty string, we will assign it a value. We have to use this to show that this variable belongs to this class, and I'm just going to assign my name to this string. I'm gonna save it, Control S. And I'm gonna go back to our HTML file and play this variable inside those curly braces. Let me save it. And let me go back to our application. And of course I need to restart it. Let's try again. And this is what we have on the screen. And now let's say I want to share the value of this name inside my about component. Let's go to our service and create a few methods to do that. First, I'm going to create a variable here. And it's going to be an empty string. Then I'm going to create two methods. One that will set that name and the other method that will retrieve that name. This setName method will receive one argument and it's going to be a string. Let's call it new name. And inside this method, we're going to set this variable to this parameter. We have to use this name equals new name. In the next method, we're going to retrieve that name. Since we need to get the name from this service, we will ask to return the value from this service back to our component. Let's use return this name. Control S to save, and that's all we need to do inside this service. Let's go back to our home component TS class, and after we set the name variable to Dmitry in here, we are gonna set it also in our service. To use the service we created in our component, we need to inject it through a constructor. To do that, we're going to type private, and you can name it anything you want. And I'm going to define this service that we are going to be using. It's here on the list, I can just click on it. And as you can see, VS Code helped me and brought this service online too. After I injected this service inside the constructor, I can start using it. Here on line 18, I'm gonna type this shared data, and after the dot, I'll be able to see the names of all methods inside our service. I'll choose the setName service, and as you remember, I need to send a string as an argument in parentheses. Control S to save it. I can now go to a different component. Let's go to our about component and bring that value from the service inside that component. Let's go first to the TypeScript file, set the variable of type string, and I'm gonna initialize it with an empty string. Inside the ng-onInit method, I'm going to call the method inside this service, getName, and before that, of course, I need to inject the service inside my constructor. And the service is imported here too. Now I'm gonna type and call the getName method. And after I get the name, I'm going to assign it to this variable. Control S to save. And I'll go to our HTML file, and I'm going to display this name on the screen too. I'm going to put a straight line to separate the main content to that. Paragraph tag. And I'm gonna put the name of that variable inside the string interpolation syntax. Control S to save. Let's go to our application. And as you can see, it's already on the screen. So if I go to home, it says hello Dmitry. And when I go to the about page, I get this hello again Dmitry sentence. And this is how you can use your service to share data between different components. In the next example, we're going to use a service as a data service. This is the URL we're going to use in our call. And if I go to this URL, this is what I will get on the screen. Let me go to this website and talk about what we are doing here. This website is a free open source API for generating random user data. If you go to the documentation and click on Introduction. You can find this URL that would let you generate up to 5,000 users and get this result as a JSON string. Let me copy it, Ctrl+C, and paste it to the address bar. And instead of 5,000, I'm gonna just type 2. And I'm getting results for 2 users. So this JSON string contains a lot of information, but it's really hard to see. To be able to see it better, I'm gonna copy it, Ctrl+A, Ctrl+C, and I'm gonna go to this website, jasonbeautifier.org. On the left panel, I'm gonna remove these curly braces, and I'm gonna paste what I copied on that page, Ctrl+V. And in the middle panel, I'm gonna click Beautify. And on the right panel, I can see all the result in a readable form. This is called JSON format. Let's find the definition for JSON. JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation, and JavaScript object is the keyword here. This is how we define objects in JavaScript. Curly braces will define objects, and square brackets will define arrays. And as you can see, you can have multiple nested objects. Like here, our name is an object within an object. Each person has multiple properties, and some of the properties are objects itself. Let's go back to VS Code, and we'll create a service that will bring all this data inside our application. I'm gonna stop our application by pressing Ctrl+C, and I'm going to create a new service. I'm gonna call it people, and I'm going to include skip tests. Press enter. This service is created, and inside this service, let's create a method that will be calling our endpoint and request the data. We're gonna call it getPeople. And before we put code inside this method, let's look at the steps we need to take. First 2 steps was already done for us by CLI. The service has been created and the instance has been provided at the root level. In the next step, we need to bring this HTTP client module inside the app module TS file. Let's go inside our app module TS file, scroll down, and inside this imports array, we're gonna add one more module. Client module, I will press tab, and VS Code also imported this module right here. Let me save it, Ctrl+S. Let's go to our people service. And here, inside the constructor, we need to inject that service. You can call it anything you want, I'm calling it HTTP. I'm gonna press enter. And as you can see, it was also imported on line 1. Now let's use this HTTP client. This HTTP. When I press enter, as you can see, I have a bunch of methods. Since we're getting the data from the server, I'm gonna choose this get method. And inside the parentheses, I'm gonna put the URL that we used to retrieve our data from the server. Let me copy it here and paste it right here. Instead of 2 users, let's bring the data about 10 users. Ctrl+S to save. Before we start using this service, we need to change one more thing. When we are calling this method from our component, we need to return this data to the component. So let's type return, Ctrl+S to save. And now our service is ready to be used. Let's use our context components to bring this data to it. I'm gonna go to our TS file of the component. And inside our constructor, I'm gonna inject our service. I'm gonna call it people service. I'm gonna click on it, and VS Code is gonna also import it on line 1. Let's create a variable where we're gonna keep all this data. And inside our ngOnInit method, we're gonna call our method inside our service. get people. And let's put all data we're gonna get to our variable people. After we get this data, let's place it on the console. Control S to save. Let's test if it works. I'm gonna run it. ng-serve. And let's go to our application. To be able to see our results, we need to press F12, or you can go to this menu, More Tools, Developer Tools, and we need to be in the console. In my console, I can see something that is called observable, and I don't see the results. Let's talk a little bit about it. If you go to the Angular documentation, you can see that observables are used for event handling, synchronous programming, and handling multiple values. If we scroll down, here you can see that an observable is defining a subscriber function. And this function is going to be executed until the subscribe method is called. Let's scroll down more. And this is the syntax we're going to be using to get the results from our observable. Let me go back to VS Code. And here after get people, I'm going to select the subscribe method. The syntax of this subscribe method is quite complicated. That is why I created a snippet. And if I type sub and select this subscribe to service, I have this code that has been inserted. I'm gonna make some space and I'm gonna use it as a reference as I put code inside my subscribe method. Inside the subscribe method, I have three callback functions. First is the next one. So I'm gonna put curly braces, type next, inside this block of code, I'm gonna handle the results that are being brought back from the service. And you can call it anything you want. You can call it result or anything else. Let's leave it like that. And here, I'm gonna display the results in the console. The next callback function will handle an error if an error happens. So I'm gonna put comma here, type error, semicolon, error, and I'm gonna use the arrow function, and I'm gonna put curly braces and put console log error message. You don't have to use curly braces if you have just one line of code, but I think it's better to see if you actually have curly braces. And I'm gonna put comma, and I'm gonna have one more block, and it's called complete. Let me just copy it and paste it here. And here I'm gonna do the same thing. And inside I'm gonna place console log, and I'm gonna say API call completed. I'm gonna delete this code that I placed here for reference. And I'm gonna also delete this code, since we're gonna put our results right here on the console. Let me save it, Control S. And let's go back to our application. Let me refresh it. And as you can see, we have some results. Let's look at it. So if I go inside the results, we have 10 objects, numbered 0 through 9. Let's look at the first one. Let's go to the name. And here, as you can see, we have first name, last name, and title. This API gives us random data every time you call it. So let me refresh the page and look again at the results. and now you can see we have a different name. Before we finish our video, I just want to mention that this data is presented as one object, but when we called our API in the browser, it looked like one long string. When we call this API in our application, let me go to this service, this method get, when it gets the result, it converts that long string into an array of objects. This process is called deserialization. Let's Google it to see the definition. Deserialization is the reverse of that process, taking data structured from some format and rebuilding it into an object. And this is what this get method did. It took a string and deserialized it, created an object out of that string. In the next video, we'll present this data on a screen using Angular directives. I hope this video was helpful and thank you for watching.